Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Code. Today we have a truly special and timely episode for you. I'm thrilled to have with us three amazing guests, Frye, Jason Gottlieb, and Jonathan Mann. You might remember Brian and Jason from their previous appearances on the show. But today's episode is unlike any other. A couple days ago, Jonathan and Brian, both artists deeply embedded in the NFT space, together with their fearless lawyer, Jason, sued the SEC. That's right, you heard me. They sued the SEC. Why do you ask? Well, put simply, to keep doing what they love doing, creating digital art. Jonathan has been writing and releasing a new song every day for the last 15 and a half years. And for the last 2.5 years, he's been minting those songs as tokens on the Ethereum blockchain. And he was like, this is really cool. Until one day, somebody said to him, hey, dude, you know those songs might be securities, right? And he's like, what? The SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, regulates securities in the United States of America. Are songs minted on the Ethereum blockchain securities? Are other forms of art minted in the form of tokens securities? Do they fall under the jurisdiction of the SEC? Should they fall under the jurisdiction of the SEC? Should the SEC regulate art? How do we even end up in that situation? We'll discuss that and more on our show.
There's Jason.
Hey, man.
Hey, guys. Sorry I'm late.
It's okay.
You're
we
good.
have
We're having
Brian
tech
here.
difficulties with Brian anyway.
Oh, all right.
Looking good. You have the obligatory black T-shirt, so.
Oh, yeah, of course.
We didn't even send out the dress code, but you're doing well.
Welcome to podcast life. Eh?
Okay.
Brian?
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
I have to say, I think Yitzy, I've joked with you about this before. Like, we're now 4+ years into this, post-COVID Zoom era. At the beginning of every call, I'm fiddling with my headphones, fiddling with sound, fiddling with all this. And I finally get it all set up like 5 minutes ago. I'm like, hi, I'm a high-tech lawyer.
I'm just getting a little more coffee.
Yeah, I think we can start the impetus. I really sort of started with when the Stoner Cats thing got announced, and Stoner Cats was this project that launched in 2021, made $8 million, selling out instantly. Actually, created a huge backup, a sort of backlog on Ethereum. There was my friend Superfizz lost 8 ETH on a bad gas transaction trying to get a Stoner Cat. So it was this big deal, and Ashton Kutcher was involved, and Mila Kunis, and they were making an animated show called Stoner Cats, and they raised all this money via the NFTs. Essentially, they just sold 10,000 or so JPEGs of cats to people who wanted them. And fast forward 2 years, and the project essentially was completed. They had made all of the episodes, and just like every other NFT project, the worth of those Stoner Cats NFTs had gone from 300, between like $800 and $1,000 to essentially worthless. And in September of 2023, the SEC sort of came out with this announcement that they had accused Stoner Cats of selling unregistered securities, that every single sale of these little JPEGs constitute a sale of an unregistered security, and that they had settled and they had to pay, Stoner Cats had to pay $1 million to the SEC, along with a bunch of other really onerous things. And when I saw that happen, it really got my hackles up. I didn't really know much. I knew by that point, I knew a little bit about securities law. I knew what the Howey test was and things like this. But then
crypto now knows what the Howey
is. It's like the first thing you learn is keep your secret safe, secret words safe, and then the second thing you learn is the 3 prongs of the Howey test. Yeah, for Prague. So the Howey test. Sorry.
Fail.
Yeah. But when I read through, first I read like the little 1-page thing that they announced their settlement, and then I clicked on the little link and I read through the entire thing, and I can remember sitting there like thinking that I was going to get to the part where they said something that made sense as to why they were securities. I kept reading and I was like, there has to be something I'm missing. Like, what am I missing here? I'm not I know nothing about this, but it seems very ridiculous. And then of course I went online and I saw everyone talking about it, and I was like, no, I'm not missing anything. This is just crazy. And the thing that really got me was how it implicated everybody, how it implicated every NFT artist that I knew, myself included, all my friends, every person who's doing cool things on the blockchain is suddenly implicated and accused of selling unregistered securities. So in response to this, I wrote a song called
and so just to give
yeah.
some context as to like why that bothered you and who you are.
Yeah.
And I'm reading from the complaint, okay?
Oh, there
but
you
basically
go. Sure.
you've been writing a song a day, a whole song every single day since January 1st, 2009, right?
Correct.
Okay, that is a date that's very dear to my heart because it's my anniversary.
Oh, no way. Oh, that's beautiful.
So now if I ever have to...
That's why Jonathan started that.
Exactly. That's why I chose that day. Yeah.
It was an ode to me and my wife, obviously, that first song. But if I ever have to know like how long I've been married for, I'll just check your Twitter page and I'll see right away.
Literally,
like,
go to songaday.world and you can know exactly how many days you've been married.
But it's also 2 days before the first the Bitcoin network was launched.
That's correct.
So,
which is actually just one of those funny, confluence of moments, right? January 3rd of 2009 is the day it came out, and I remember it very well. I was like super plugged into like the financial crash and everything, and this was like big news in the financial crash.
So that I often think like I wish I could go back to the day that I got married and take my wedding money and just go and buy some Bitcoin a few days later. I had no idea.
Oh, no, of course not.
I mean, I consider myself like an OG being in crypto since 2016, but like I wasn't thinking about crypto like before 2013. I hadn't even heard of it until 2013. So
exactly,
good for you, man.
Yeah. well, I similarly did not. At the time it was you had to have quite a lot of technical skill to set up a mining rig, and like you couldn't I
couldn't buy one because it was too complicated for me.
But you could. We all could have been just mining it like crazy on our 2009 crappy HP laptops or whatever, which is wild to think about. So I have been writing a song a day.
So you had making the song a day.
Yeah.
And so
but starting in 2022, I've been making NFT every day since every single song since January 1st of 2022 has been made into an NFT.
In other words, a blockchain token, which is representative of the ownership of one of your song a day tokens. Song a day songs.
Yeah, exactly. And it's
so you're minting songs daily.
Minting a song every single day, and I've been doing that, for however many days that is. And yeah, and so in that way, it really occurred to me like, okay, I'm committing securities. Is it fraud? No, I guess I'm
definitely not
fraud. I'm selling unregistered securities every single day. Every single day, I'm breaking the law by doing this thing, and so is everyone else I know, essentially.
So that's where it irked you. Like that was like why it really
that's
pissed
what
you
irked
off.
me, and I wrote a song called "This Song Is a Security."
This song is a security. I better register with the SEC. If it resells, I get a royalty, and the better I do, the more it will be.
And then maybe if Jason wants to take it from there, or the path from that song to the lawsuit, that's sort of where the genesis of the whole thing.
Well, then where did Brian come in? First of all, where did Brian come in? Second of all, at some point, you have all these guitars in the background and two musicians on the line. Like, you guys are going to have to play something together at some
Jason,
point.
we should work up a rendition of this song as a security where like we both can.
Oh no, it's going to happen.
Yeah,
it's going to happen on this call. It's going to happen on this call.
Send over the stems. It'll be great.
when Brian is speaking, you guys go grab your guitars, okay?
Okay. All right.
That's what law professors love, is when their students are deeply paying attention. Brian, why don't you talk about your project and how you got involved, and then I'll talk about more of the legal aspects.
Yeah, sure. Well, so maybe I'll do like a kind of Back to the Future type thing. So the moment Jonathan's talking about right now, where he went to Jason and they started, talking about how to put this lawsuit together, is where I got involved, because they started thinking, right, is there someone else out there who might be a good fit for a lawsuit like the one we are contemplating? And I venture to say that I was one of the first names that came to mind, because I'm pretty well known, if I'm known at all, within the crypto and
as an SEC hater.
Yeah, as an SEC troll.
Urker.
Right? And so this is actually a project that, for me, in a funny way, has been in the works for going on 20 years, right? So
just playing off of that, like, to me, it seems that like what you guys are doing now through Jason's masterfully written complaint is a sort of conceptual art legal play.
I would take exception to that, actually, because the last thing I want anyone to walk away from this complaint feeling is that it's just conceptual art or just an act of trolling. You're not saying that, but I think, to continue on Brian's story, he actually sought no action relief from the SEC for some of his ideas that were art, but actually ticked off a lot of the boxes of the Howey test. And the SEC studiously ignored him. When he tried to follow up with him, they ignored him. He sent a FOIA request and got information that they weren't taking him seriously because they thought he was just, trolling. It was just more concept art. And I think there's a very serious point here. And the point is that the SEC, in interpreting the Supreme Court's Howey test, has taken it far beyond what anyone who drafted the 1933 Act could have imagined, far beyond what any of the justices on the Supreme Court would have thought in 1946 when they were deciding the Howey test, and beyond where anyone else would have thought that it should be. Ultimately, the Howey test is meant to be flexible. It's meant to capture investments of all sorts where those investment contracts meet the definitions and they are securities. So nobody's saying that, the only thing the SEC could ever touch are, stock certificates in nicely traded companies and nothing else. But what we are saying is that art and music, this is special. This is something different. And before the SEC, which is the Securities and Exchange Commission, like their job is to regulate securities and exchange and not art, before the SEC blunders outside where its core competencies are, it should be treading very, very lightly and very carefully. Now, when I saw Stoner Cats and Impact Theory come out, I was horrified for a few reasons. One, because it really didn't strike me that these are securities, that a lot of these NFTs, at the core, the NFT is art. As Brian said, maybe it's just the certificate of the ownership of the art, but in a way that is part of the artwork. It's an inextricable part of that artwork. And NFTs, after all, are just software, and software is as flexible as the human imagination. So you can build art that has, as Matt Levine put it, partially complicated concert tickets, and yes, maybe partially investments into founders' plans to make animated web series about, stoned cats.
Mm-hmm.
This makes it complicated. which of course enriches the art. But the SEC's point of view is, well, we kind of detect the faint odor of an investment contract here, so this is ours. We're going to regulate this. And that to me was the first horrifying part. The second horrifying part, as Jonathan said, reading through the settlements, you kind of didn't really understand what compelled them to think that this was something they needed to be regulating. But the most horrifying part was the relief that the SEC demanded in this settlement. Now, it was just a settlement. It was a no admit, no deny settlement. The projects didn't admit that they'd done anything wrong. So there's a compromise. But the SEC demanded that the projects destroy NFTs that they had created but not yet sold. And if the NFT is an inextricable part of the art that they had created, this was the federal government telling artists, we don't like the way you're offering your art. You need to destroy art that you have created. And to me, this is an absolutely offensive notion that the federal government should tell artists to destroy their art. And when I look at what Jonathan does, right, he creates his music there as music. He creates an NFT. He sells the NFT. He sells series in the NFTs. People can buy Jonathan's music, buy the NFT because they enjoy the music, just for the pure enjoyment of it. But they can also buy a song a day NFT because they think Jonathan will continue to grow and get more famous and get more influential, and the value of that NFT may increase. So there's a musical element, there's an ownership or a belonging to a club element, and there may also be an investment element where people are hoping that the price goes up. But that's true of Jonathan's music, that's true of Damien Hirst paintings, that's true of Andy Warhol's series of paintings, it's true of all sorts of music and art. And I think before the SEC blunders into this area, they need to very carefully tread so as they are not, interfering with the useful arts, as the Constitution puts it, and really stick to their core securities and exchange area.
I think worse than that is the sort of like blasé fashion in which they conduct these actions. Like you have people like Brian who are, activists of sorts, who have been prodding them to provide some kind of a guidance as to, okay, you know what? You say that I'm a security, or that I'm not a security. Okay, what then do I need to do in order to be compliant with SEC regulations? And then rather than giving any kind of guidance, they just kind of ignore you. And not only do they ignore you, it's one thing if they ignore you and other artists and say, like, this is not in our realm, I'm not going to waste my time with this guy. But they ignore you, and then they go after Stoner Cats for the exact thing that you asked for guidance with regards to. So it's really, I mean, like, Jason, we discussed this a few weeks ago when we did our podcast episode. Like, this kind of stuff really makes me angry. It's irresponsible, and it completely negates the mandate that they received from the American people to protect investors. And instead, they're going after artists who are making a song a day, which is so fucking cool.
It raises an issue. Brian, I mentioned that you filed for no action relief and basically got ignored, and you followed up with a FOIA, and they have internal emails of them disregarding you. But the denial of that no action relief, and it wasn't a denial, it was sort of a pocket veto, like they just ignored it, coupled with these two actions, impact theory and Stoner Cats, I think for me are sufficient to constitute the kinds of final agency actions that are necessary to make a lawsuit like this survive. I think there's no question that if I just sued the SEC and said, I think you guys should not regulate bananas taped to a wall, a judge might look at that and say, nobody's ever saying that they should. Like, what are you doing here? Get out of my courtroom. But when you look at SEC actions against the things that Jonathan and Brian have been doing, and millions of other artists and musicians are doing, including, as we point out, Taylor Swift, nobody thinks that she's a securities law scofflaw, but the SEC is, in effect, through these actions, reserving itself the right to take that position, and doing so in a way that leaves musicians and artists not knowing whether they could possibly be the next target. So what are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to go hire lawyers to explain whether they're violating the securities laws or not? I think if you tell a young, hungry, poor, starving artist they've got to spend all their money on securities lawyers, they're gonna hopefully laugh at you and go back to writing their next song.
Or but maybe worse, they won't. I mean, like, I can't tell you how many projects, not only artists, but just generally people who are building in this space. And when we meet, and people tell them, oh, it's either highly regulated or unregulated to the extent that you need lawyers to help walk you through it. And people give me a call and they want to kind of get understanding as to like what this is going to cost them, what's required from a legal perspective, from a regulatory perspective, and then they're like, this is expensive. Like, and you say, well, the alternative is that you don't have lawyers, you don't go through these motions, and then you might get fucked, and then it'll cost you way more money. So, so then the outcome is often like, okay, I'm not going to undertake this endeavor because, like, maybe I would have made some money, maybe it would have been a great thing, maybe not. But one thing that's for sure is that I can't take these initial steps without paying $100,000 to a lawyer to like hold my hand and walk me through the process. So, like, God forbid artists should not create their art now because they don't know how and what that will mean for them in the next coming months and years.
Hey Gary, give me a call, baby, and we can settle this once and for all, maybe, because it's so confusing. I don't know what you're doing. Is it power you're abusing for kicks? You keep losing in court. I know that's gotta hurt. Now you're trying to extort the JPEG pics, but
The financial thing is really, it's really something, right? If you are a big bank with 200 lawyers, compliance lawyers on staff all the time, then yes, there are going to be rules that you have to follow, and compliance. It can be onerous and expensive and burdensome, but that's the business model, and you know it. If you're a small startup in America, you may not be able to afford all of that. So it's hard enough for the small startups, but presumably those small startups, hopefully they've got a little bit of capital. They've got some runway, so it's extremely onerous, but maybe not devastating. But if you're a young musician, we were joking before, right? My first guitar was something I bought in high school, and it was $300, and I couldn't afford anything nicer until a long way away from that. No kid like that is going to have the money, and let's face it, that's where a lot of artists are starting out. And they're in high school, they're young, they're not going to have the funds to go get securities law advice.
So in that sense, this complaint is important in order to set, like, hopefully, to set some kind of like guidelines as to what and how you should create art and what that even means or could mean for you. And in that sense, I want to ask you. So you guys made a play against the SEC, right? You filed this complaint. Like, if you put your SEC hat on now, like, what does this do to you as the SEC? Like, is this like a nudge? Is it a kick? Is it a nuisance? Like, as a fly you just flick off? Like, how are they envisioning this complaint? Is it coming in on top of a pile of a million? How many people file lawsuits against the SEC annually? Like, what does this mean for the SEC? Number one, and number two, what are the possible expected outcomes that can come from this? What's your like dream outcome, and what do you think would most probably happen?
So I don't want to get too deep into legal strategy or what the full chess game is here. I would expect the SEC does get sued a fair number of times from time to time. Most of those suits are going to be uphill climbs because they suffer from ripeness. The SEC does have a certain degree of sovereign immunity for some of the actions it takes. But there's a new spate of lawsuits that have come out recently, including ours, but also including lawsuits by Legilex, by the DeFi Education Fund regarding a challenge to the dealer rule. There are a number of other affirmed by Consensus, who filed after receiving a Wells notice, a number of other lawsuits that have really absorbed the lessons of the past case law and have a much stronger basis for surviving that SEC initial motion. Now, the government doesn't want to be sued. Nobody wants to be sued. So to the extent that the SEC can possibly rest on statutory defenses of immunity or defenses of ripeness, I would expect fully that they would attempt to do so. But I think that this case and some of the others that have been filed recently have much stronger grounds to survive those kinds of initial attacks. And then at the end of the day, you asked sort of what we're hoping to get from all this, and I think there's sort of the broader ask, and then there's the narrower ask. The broader ask, of course, would be for the federal courts to rein in the SEC on this point and say art is special. It does not qualify as a security unless you have a lot of very specific things that apply to it. And it can't just be that it's sort of, there's this partial little whiff of investment, as we discussed in the Stoner Cats example, if there's all this other artistic merit to it. I think that the artistic merit is going to outweigh. And that's a very broad ask. The narrower ask is what we've asked for the declaratory judgment relief on, is that these two gentlemen, Jonathan and Brian, have art projects that are ready to go and they would like to release them, but they can't because they have a real fear that those projects will be met with the same treatment that Stoner Cats and Impact Theory have gotten. And Brian even took it a step further and said, hey, can I do something like this? And got no response. So the fear here is real, it's heightened. And the narrow ask is just to say, we want a declaratory judgment that these two art projects can proceed. And if they are, and if that serves as precedent for others in the space, that's great, all the better. But ultimately, one of the biggest problems of litigation, whether it's the SEC's desire to regulate through its enforcement calendar, or whether it's these individual actions, courts take the case that's in front of them. So we're asking the court just to take the case that's in front of it and issue a ruling on the declaratory judgment that my clients are asking about.
And to what extent is this a political thing? Like we heard Trump's speech at the Bitcoin conference, so it had to come up, where he says, the first thing he's going to do in his first day in office is fire Gary Gensler. Like, is Gary the defendant here, or is the SEC much bigger than Gary? If there's a new chair that comes in tomorrow, could he just say like, oh, you guys are right. This is, art is not a security. Like, what are the political plays of how this could play out? And also, what's the is there a time frame that during which they need to respond? Could it just sit on the back burner until February?
Could you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it when the news was that Gary Gensler was going to be the pick to take over the SEC, wasn't there some hope initially because of his statements that he had made, for instance, as a teacher, and that he sort of understood blockchain, that he was going to be good for the space? Wasn't that a thing that people thought prior?
I just remember all his MIT classes were all over Twitter where he was.
So
yeah, people were optimistic.
Yes, he did say a lot of things that were inconsistent to the things he is saying today. That is correct.
It just seems to me that from a political standpoint, you don't know, and then Trump says a lot of things to a lot of people about a lot of stuff. So it's to take any politician, much less Trump, at their word about something is not a strategy to be relied on. And crypto at its heart, I think in a lot of ways, is about challenging the state in a variety of ways. That's a big part of what crypto is for a lot of people, myself included. And so, whatever we can do to just from a political standpoint, to get clarity on this one little kind of tiny corner of our world, to me, regardless of what else is happening in politics, it seems worth it.
I think that I had some hopes for Chairman Gensler's term. When he was at the CFTC, he was active in enforcement, but was also active in rulemaking under Dodd-Frank, which had been passed in 2010. The industry didn't like a lot of the rules that he was passing, but a lot of the rules were things that could be followed, right? They didn't like what the position limits for speculations in shorts and futures were because they were too low and they wanted them to be higher. But these are clear rules. They can be followed. And I think that a lot of the problem that the digital assets industry has had in America is that we don't have a clear set of rules that can be followed. It's very difficult to figure out how one launches a token in America today. Like, is it a security? Well, if so, how does it trade? How do you know when it's got 2,000 plus holders? How does it fit into any of these rules that are built for securities, that are built for stocks, that are built for bonds, that are built for things that have a form and they don't change? And then you have software, which, as I said, is mutable and can be many, many different things at the same time. Our securities laws just aren't built for it. So I was hoping that Gensler, who had taught about this at MIT, so presumably had some technical understanding about how this would work, would come in and say, you know something, this doesn't quite fit the rules, but we here at the SEC, we want to protect consumers. We want to incentivize capital formation. We want market efficiency and market stability. So what we're going to do is make sensible rules that people can follow as we work the next generation of assets into our financial system. I frankly was hopeful. Maybe that was totally naive in retrospect, totally naive, because what we got instead was enforcement and enforcement and enforcement and enforcement. And then we got some rulemaking, but the rulemaking was basically all of you all are dealers now. So everyone has to register as a dealer, even though it is literally impossible for you to register as a dealer. The exchange rule that was proposed, an amendment to Rule 3b16, is very much the same. All of you all are exchanges now, so you all have to register, even though it is literally impossible for you to register. These rules leave the digital assets industry completely out in the cold, with nowhere to go and no possible way to develop except to go overseas. And when we look at Europe and the Caymans and BVI and Japan and the UK and Hong Kong and Singapore, all of these other countries are promulgating rules, sensible rules that people can follow. And maybe we don't like some of the rules. This one's too harsh, but we can follow them. The industry can exist and grow and develop there. And if we don't have that here in America, and if we don't start implementing that pretty soon, we're going to fall behind on literally the next generation of finance. And I don't know how America catches up after that. Sorry, I just got polemical. You asked about politics. That's what happens.
That's it.
I was completely enthralled in that vision that you were painting. Brian, we kept losing you a few times. I'd love it if you continued those thoughts.
Can we hear you now? Yes.
I was just going to add to what Jason was saying. The part of the issue here is that the SEC does a lot of, if not most of, its regulation via enforcement rather than via formal rulemaking, like a lot of other agencies do. And as a consequence, the SEC is kind of in a position, if it wants to sort of pick its defendant, right? And in this particular case, it picked the defendants, which were things like Stoner Cats and impact theory. It chose not to pick defendants like me and Jonathan. And so I think what, at least to my mind, part of what we're doing here is saying you can't just pick and choose whoever you want to in order to say what it is you're going to do, because what you're doing is affecting all of us as well, right? It's not just affecting Stoner Cats, although I think, and as some of the SEC's own commissioners have pointed out, right, the settlement with Stoner Cats didn't make any sense, right? But it's affecting us too. It's affecting a whole lot of other artists. And the SEC is just pretending like we don't exist. And I think that's a real problem. And I don't think that they should be able to do that.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second, just because like there were some holes in the argument, like as far as I said it, and I think that you just like pinpointed some of them. So you're not the same as like a 10K generative art collection, which is setting out its roadmap and is like heavily drawing on its roadmap, and it's like Twitter FOMO and FUD to continuously drive up the price of its
I would say
floor price.
on the contrary, right? My project, cryptographic tokens of material financial benefit, is a 10,320 token collection, which I will be promoting with the goal of making my purchasers feel like winners. Right? They're going to be part of a big project that's going to be valuable to them. And because it's going to make me a powerful and famous artist, in the future, these tokens are going to be extremely valuable and they'll be able to resell them for a profit, or at least that's my hope and belief.
But you're doing that to put a spotlight on the ridiculousness of the SEC's lack of rulemaking. Okay, like nobody actually thinks, or at least a normal person shouldn't actually think that Jonathan or Taylor or you are making unregistered securities. Okay, but what you're saying is,
but I didn't think stoner cats or impact theory were either.
Okay, but they're different. Okay, they're different than what you're doing, and what you're saying is because of the lack of clarity, I might be guilty by association. Okay?
No. What we're saying is this is the key point. What we're saying is just like that judge said about the SEC. The SEC is capricious and kind of random in who they choose to enforce on, and I will say 100%. Genuinely that I feel like I could get at any moment I could. And this has happened to me in the past where my profile suddenly raises very fast in a very short amount of time. I go viral and things happen, and I'm selling my NFTs. When I look at the cases that they decide to do, I see no rhyme or reason for it. And it's that it's that kind of like randomness that makes me feel implicated and makes me feel like genuinely at some point I could be in the spotlight. I could be the one.
Okay. I totally hear you.
It's not different. It's not different.
But it is different.
No, it's different. It's absolutely not different, right? So I did an exact same.
Wait, 1 second. I think it's different because the possibility of getting screwed is where I think like you need to make the differentiation. Like if you're making art for the sake of making art, and because you think art is beautiful, then people should 1 second, and then people should like want to be able to buy your art. And yeah, art is a speculative investment. Okay, in a single piece of art, it is not a security. Okay, I'm buying the art because I think I read Elon Musk's biography by Walter Isaacson. I wanted to go out and buy a Tesla. Okay, I read the Shoe Dog book. I wanted to go out and buy a new pair of Nikes. I felt like that I related to the brand. I see what you're doing with the SEC. I want to go and buy some of your music. But
so
it's not the same thing.
I will argue this from the other side then, because.
Wait, let me just finish. Yeah. It's not the same thing, okay? Yeah. As I don't know if any of you noticed Scottie Pippen's Twitter account over the last few weeks, completely weird, scammy shit. He's like, he's tokenizing a basketball and like clear cash grab, okay? That's where the rulemaking, I think, needs to come in, because that, I'm not saying it's a security, but there need to be rules about that, okay? About how you promote and market and sell things in such a heavily speculative fashion versus making art because it's beautiful and cool. People might want to own that and be part of it.
The Scottie Pippen whatever, that's a separate kind of issue.
So it's separate.
You can't argue to me that Stoner Cats was not art. That was not primarily art. It was created.
Also art.
It was no. It was primarily
art.
The way
that you market and storytell.
But listen to me. It was created by a group for 3 writers who you don't know the names of. You've never heard of them. You don't know who they are. They are just people like me and Brian. They are
You're just strengthening my position, because if you don't know them, then that's where the hype comes in, and the FUD, and the like making
But
a whole.
they had a project that they imagined called Stoner Cats that this one writer, Sarah Cole, had been working on for years, that she loved, and that meant a lot to her. It's funny, it's silly, it's Stoner Cats or whatever, but if you actually watch it, it's also a very sweet show. It's a very like sweet, funny, cool little show. Okay, they hand animated, by the way, by
Not even digitally generated.
Not digitally generated, by a really cool animator called Chris Cartega, who they are just like, probably make like $250,000 a year or whatever, living in Hollywood, like scraping by. That's scraping by in Hollywood. But, they sort of got lucky, right? They got lucky as I have gotten lucky, as Brian has gotten lucky, as artists occasionally get lucky. They hooked up with Mila Kunis, and that's sort of where, and they arrived in the world of NFTs in this moment when things were quite frothy, and they got lucky. But it was primarily art. What they were making and what they were doing and what they were attempting to do. And by the way, had they not been sued by the SEC,
they would have succeeded in doing it.
I actually would have more faith in them than in a lot of other projects. Let's just put it that way. That they would have been able to deliver on their visions. Not that really even has anything to do with anyway, because making shit is hard, and that's just the truth. Also, making art, making anything succeed is extremely difficult.
Again, so that's why you need the rule making and the guidelines.
Let me come at this from a different way, because this notion that you can separate, making art for the beauty of making art, and then selling it to people and having it be involved in commerce and people buying it for certain reasons. The idea that those two things can be separate, I think, is fantasy, right?
No,
Artists.
I went off on a tangent for a second.
No, I was
speaking from the soul instead of from my mind. That's always the danger.
It's a very important point here. I think a really critical point, because you're right. You could imagine basically anything in the world packaged and sold as a security, right? The oranges from Howie, the oranges themselves, not the security, but the packaging of them and the investment into the returns that you would get from selling the juice, it could be a security. Okay, understood. But when we look at art, right, we tell a story in the complaint about Andy Warhol, right? He's doing his soup can series, and ultimately, think about this. It's a series of artworks that slightly differ from each other, right? You can really see the difference, the similarities between this and sort of the collections of NFTs that you have in Impact Theory, Stoner Cats, and a number of the other NFT collections. They sell them as Warhol gets more famous. The price of these things get more famous, and Warhol, in talking about art and his own art, says being good in business is the most fascinating kind of art. Making money is art, and working is art, and good business is the best art. He was very cognizant of the connections between commerce and the art, right? Ultimately, the artist got to put money on their table, right? Jonathan and Brian have people at home that they want to feed and take care of. All artists do want to make some money, most of them. The commerce in art is inextricably interlinked, and the way artists can make more money is to be more famous. The way you become more famous is you create more, you're selling more, people go to see your shows more, right? You become a figure in, dare I say it, in this charged world, an ecosystem. Taylor Swift, prime example, right? And you can go and buy Taylor Swift signed collectibles and merch. Are all these things art in a way? Yes. And clearly she is creating art. It's not just the songs, but everything in her ecosystem is a work of art that feeds into this commercial commercialized art. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm not saying it in a good way. It's just a very neutral way. It just is what it is. So this is the danger, right? If the SEC comes in and says, well, hang on a second, art for art's sake is fine. We're not going to touch that. We're not going to go after Jonathan for writing a song and releasing a song. But as soon as you commercialize it and offer it in a way that we don't like, well, we're gonna step in. And that's where I have to say, well, hold on a second. Right? Why do you have the right to go after art just because that art is commercialized? It's not the commercialization of something that gives you the right to go after it. So that's why even if it has, it could, if you stretched and squinted at the Howey test and said, well, I guess maybe it could apply, like that can't be enough, because that would subsume literally all art into it, right? And then you'd have the SEAC, right? The Securities Exchange and Art Commission, and that's not what we want. That's not what we should have, and it's terrible for art in America.
And to add to what Jason just said, the Supreme Court has said very explicitly in the copyright context that the ability to not only create, but also to commercialize, the ability to sell your art has First Amendment implications.
There's some really interesting First Amendment types of issues here. We don't talk about that in the complaint, but they do hover over this entire case. Now, there's no First Amendment right to violate securities law, right? If I go out and say, hey, buy all my fake Apple stock that I just printed in my basement and it's great, you're going to make a lot of money, like I'm committing securities fraud. There's no question about that. That would be a bad thing for
even if you're right, this is not a security.
Yeah, exactly. You can't. So I can't say, well, it was the First Amendment. I have the freedom to say what I want. Like that. That's not the way it works. And courts are pretty uniform in saying that there's no First Amendment right to violate the securities laws. But that presupposes the violation. It presupposes that there is a security law that covers that point. So I think when we're thinking about the First Amendment protections that art and even the commercialization of art has, I think it's another reason for the SEC to tread very carefully here. Because sure, you could come in and say, well, there's no First Amendment right to violate the securities laws, but you have to ask, does the First Amendment make us look more carefully at whether the securities laws were designed to cover this thing? Right? I think, were they designed to cover, the anti-fraud provisions? I don't think anyone would argue that. But is Section 5 of the 1933 Act designed to cover the projects that Jonathan and Brian are doing and their commercialization of their projects? I don't think that anyone could seriously argue that either the drafters of the 33 Act or the Supreme Court in Howey or any of the Supreme Court precedents since then would seriously argue that it is. And until the SEC came in and said, we think that it is, I think that was really unprecedented and unthinkable, in part because of the First Amendment implications of that position.
Yeah, 100%.
This is fantastic. I would like to end, we need to end with Jonathan and Jason grabbing your guitars and getting this song is a security tabs up on the screen and belting out a tune. Jason, grab your guitar, man.
Grab my guitar? I don't even know what key this is in.
It's like,
should I have learned this
Jonathan,
before?
send him the you're on mute, man.
It's an A minor.
All right.
I feel like I need a tambourine or something.
You grab one.
I got my
This song is for security. I better register with the SEC. If it sells, I get a royalty. And the more I make, the better it will be. Hey, Gary, give me a sign, baby. And you know I'm gonna register. How do I do that, baby? Because this song is a security. I better register with the SEC. If this resells, I get a royalty. And the better I do, the more it will be.
Oh yeah, I love it. That was
Never
phenomenal.
played that one before.
That was great. That was great. Thank you guys. Thank you all for your time. Any last remarks before we sign off?
No, thank you. This was fun.
Thank you guys.
100%.
Thank you so
Great to
much.
be back.
Hope to publish within the next couple hours. I'm gonna have
Oh,
to
wow.
just edit out all
Right
of
on.
Brian's awkward disappearances.
Don't edit out all of Brian's awkwardness though,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
you know
that's part of the game. Yeah.
The mustache.
we love
twist.
you, Brian.
Thank you guys. You
All
guys
right.
are awesome. I really appreciate you.
Bye.
Have a good one.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, folks.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Code. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, share with your friends, and to tune in again next week for more fun and insightful conversation.